In this short video, I'm going to discuss 3 questions about counterpoint. What is counterpoint? Why study counterpoint? And how can I learn counterpoint? Counterpoint is often defined as the art of writing melodies which fit together, but the reality is more complicated. Let's look at it more closely. First of all, human perception always has priorities. The reason is simple. If danger is approaching, you need to drop everything else and pay attention immediately. No animal without these priorities could even survive. Music is not a basic survival skill, but it is subject to this limitation in the way our minds work. You can't simultaneously pay equal attention to several things. This means that when combining melodies into counterpoint, the lines can never be entirely equal. There is always one in the foreground. In a song, the texture is simple. The priority is normally the vocal melody. But in a contrapuntal texture, the listener's attention often moves from voice to voice. There's still a focus, but not always on the same voice. There are several kinds of contrapuntal textures, which distribute the interest in different ways. In a fugue, for example, all the voices develop the same material, in imitation. The entry of each voice after a silence is a novel element, and it attracts the listener's attention. Once all the parts have entered, the listener will usually focus on whatever is the most active line. Actually, the details of perceptual priorities are a bit more complicated, but this generalization will serve us here. The main point is that there's always a perceptual foreground, and the composer has to know where it is. In the first fugue of the Well-Tempered Clavier, the theme contains several motives, and all 4 parts work them out in imitation. Notice how each entry attracts your ear in turn. Now let's look at another kind of contrapuntal texture. This chorale prelude is from Bach's Orgelbüchlein. It begins with imitation in the lower 3 voices around the motive X, which you can see on the score. The imitation happens while the slower moving chorale melody soars on top. I call this stratified texture. The parts do not all share the same material. Also note that although the texture has 4 voices, there are only 2 levels of rhythmic activity. The chorale in long notes on top versus the imitation in 16th notes in the other more active voices. When the bottom voice turns into plain 8th notes in the last bar, we now have 3 levels of activity: chorale, middle voices, which imitate X, and the steady 8th note bass. So, 4 parts, but 2, and later 3 layers. The next thing we have to emphasize about counterpoint is that melodies sounding together inevitably create harmonies, and these harmonies need to be coherent. In fact, counterpoint can't exist without harmony. As you advance in your study of harmony and counterpoint, the 2 disciplines ultimately fuse into one. You can't master chromatic harmony without fluid part writing, and you can't do advanced counterpoint without rich harmony. So you need to think of harmony and counterpoint as 2 aspects of the same musical whole. That's why it's often more realistic to think in terms of degrees of contrapuntal interest than just to categorize musical textures as harmonic or contrapuntal. Here are 2 contrasting examples to make this clear. Here I will play them on the organ since I don't have a choir handy. If we listen to these two chorale harmonizations by Bach, we easily perceive the vigorous counterpoint between the top and bottom lines. In both examples, the outer parts form a strong two-part frame, solidly enclosing the middle voices. Let's listen to these outer part frames alone. Now if we play the middle parts one at a time, the two chorales are quite different. Listen to the alto and then the tenor to the first example. They're basically filler. Now let's listen to the middle parts of the second example. They form interesting lines in their own right. So the second example is really more contrapuntal than the first. Although the listener might not notice much difference here, especially at first hearing, the performers certainly do. There are three main reasons to study counterpoint. First, as we saw above, the outer parts in tonal music normally form a rich counterpoint. These outer contrapuntal parts give direction, underline important moments in the form. When learning harmony, if you don't spend a lot of time on bass lines, and note the word lines, you're missing a very powerful tool. And a good bass line must be a good counterpoint. Second, in writing for choral or orchestral ensembles, there's a need to make all the players' parts as interesting as possible. I call this quasi-counterpoint. It's more than simple, minimal part writing, like in the first chorale example above, but less than fully contrapuntal texture, like in the fugue example above. As I already said, the difference in texture between the two chorales for the listener is negligible, but for the singers, it counts a lot. The third reason to study counterpoint is that contrapuntal forms, fugue in particular, are an opportunity to focus on developing musical ideas in a very concentrated way, without recourse to major contrasts of texture. Counterpoint is a normal part of a composer's education, but its real purpose is often ignored. Although a musicologist might want to get to know the style of a given composer well enough to mimic it, for a composer, the study of counterpoint has a much more basic purpose. I call it making friends with the notes. And like any new friendship, this will require spending a lot of time with them. You have to come at ease with the many ways the notes can combine with each other. Counterpoint is normally taught either by trying to imitate an existing style, usually Palestrina or Bach, or else by going through a graded series of exercises called species counterpoint. Each method has its pros and cons, but the main goal in both is fluency. It's like learning a language. You need a lot of varied practice for it to become second nature. Quantity counts. An essential proviso. A good counterpoint teacher will focus on finding multiple solutions to problems and not just on what is forbidden. What you do is more important than what you avoid. Another important point. There are two kinds of rules in counterpoint. First, there are the rules of musical reality, like the range of a given voice or instrument. These are not negotiable. The other kind of rule is pedagogical, like avoiding dissonances on the beat during your first exercises. Obviously, there's plenty of real music out there with dissonances on the beat. This rule is really just a way of focusing on one thing at a time, for example, the shape of your lines. This second kind of rule will evolve as you progress. No matter which method you're using, sing, and if you can, play everything you write. If you're writing three-part counterpoint, sing each line while playing the others in turn. If you aren't at ease at the keyboard, you can use the computer to play back the other lines while you sing one part at a time. The singing approach takes time, but it will help you develop a real sensitivity to lines and to harmony in a way that no passive approach could equal. Don't just listen to your computer while it does all the work. Counterpoint is a way to achieve musical richness. Once you're at ease with it, you'll see it everywhere.